it to heaven and a pastor's legal battle, that and more coming up. Welcome to Newsmakers, the show where we go behind the headlines each week to bring you interviews with pastors, entertainers, politicians, and other notable news figures. On today's Newsmakers, we're starting out with two of my favorite people, Carlos and Alexa Penavega. They are a Hollywood couple who are here to share their Christian faith, a new movie they're in, as well as a powerful story of navigating loss and clinging closer to God. With no further ado, here are Carlos and Alexa, welcoming them to Newsmakers. So Carlos and Alexa, a lot to dive into here. We're going to be talking here about Mr. Manhattan, and this is a really interesting film. It hits on a lot of big themes. Carlos, I'll start with you. You play Mason. What was it that made you want to dive into this film when you saw the script?
Well, I was the number one on the call sheet, and my wife was
Oh my gosh.
No, I'm kidding.
But for real, that was the first time you were number
That was really cool. It was really cool to lead a movie. I've never actually done that. Normally, I'm like one of the supportings, but no, I loved the journey. I always tell people, I love making faith-based films. Sometimes I find that they can be a little too like on the nose, like let's tell a Jesus story. And not that that's bad, but if we're trying to reach a wider audience and cast a bigger net, I think that we need to be making more worldly content, right?
So from a kingdom heart.
From a kingdom heart, but
worldly
content, because people are broken. Life has hills and valleys, right? Peaks and valleys.
Peaks and valleys.
Peaks and valleys. So, so for me, I think I really felt like this was a step in that direction. It was a movie that had a great story, but also had a great message. And it wasn't, I hate to say it this way, but it's not shoving faith down anyone's throat. It's like, hey, just come watch this movie, come see this guy's journey, and come see how God interjected himself into his life and how things panned out.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because like there's so many real stories that are tough. Like they're hard, they're gritty. Like we know this, like life is difficult sometimes. And I think a lot of where we are right now in Christian film is like, we haven't gotten there yet fully, and we're starting to, right? Where we're telling those stories, and there might be a difficult word here or there because that's the reality of what happened. And so I don't know if you want to respond to that at all, Alexa. I didn't mean to talk over you. Go ahead.
No. Hey, I was just kind of jumping in with you. No, the Christian walk isn't pretty. And I feel like that's something that I think maybe modern day Christianity has tried to sell a little bit, where, if you join the church, if you are a part of our Christian faith, you get a bow, it's going to be easy, and you're going to get what you want. And it's actually the opposite. It's really flipping hard. And we can really attest to this as like, Billy, like we're walking through grief right now after losing our daughter. And that was the hardest thing we have ever had to experience, ever. But what's awesome about our God is he has truly met us between this place of pain and peace. And he really spoke to us with, like, we've been saying, like, the slogan for this season really feels like pain with purpose. And it's interesting how God will make any painful experience that you have gone through, whether it was before you really knew him because he already knew you, or while you're walking with him, he brings purpose to all the painful things in your life. And he turns them into testimonies. He turns them into the thing that you thought was going to kill you actually is the thing that elevates you. And it's been very unique for us to be in this season because I feel like we've gotten a chance to know God on a level that we didn't even know we were capable of, because he's really brought us to a whole new place with him. And it's been very fruitful in a season that could have felt otherwise.
Yeah, and you've both it's been inspirational to watch how you've navigated that, and even how you're talking about it now, because I think there's so many people hurting and going through so many different things. And what you have faced is one of the most unimaginable things to go through. And you've both handled it with such grace. And yeah, I want to commend you for that. When it comes to faith and then creating these kinds of projects, you know, it's interesting because you can go a lot of different ways in Hollywood, and you guys have done everything, right? And, you know, music, and obviously, you know, Carlos, with you, and then film, and then TV. What is it? You were kind of speaking to this before, Carlos, but I'll start with you, Alexa. What keeps you guys wanting to tell these kinds of stories? You know, the stories that go deeper than just entertaining. They entertain, but they do more than that.
I actually feel like it's because we were genuinely called to do this. God has just given us, well, he's given us so many opportunities, but he's really given us this platform, and it's really been pouring into our hearts where he's like, I need you to reach people. And the entertainment industry is just something that we've always loved, that we've really been able to flourish in. But at this point in our lives right now, God's like, we're in this place where, again, like Carlos was saying, like, people view God as either transactional or just dead, like non-existent. They don't realize how embedded he is in your life, like from when you were in your womb. Like, he loves you, he knew you, he knit you together. So for us, we're like, okay, how do we do exactly what Carlos was saying? How do we make content that is for the world, but really coming from a kingdom heart? And I think the biggest thing is finding characters that, you know, are broken like all of us, but really have that redemption in the end. And you don't even necessarily it doesn't have to be a faith-based movie. It doesn't have to be like a, Jesus, you saved my life, but just knowing that there is more, and that, you know, walking through a life that is different and transformational than maybe where you were before.
Yeah.
I think these are the seeds that we can be planting. And that's all we can.
Well, most of these movies have this, you know, let's just call it a Jesus lens, right? It's like, life is perfect. Nobody gets a divorce. There's no death. Everyone's you know, like, the grass is green. It's so nice. I'm so sad. Jesus saved me. And it's like, okay, I get it. I'm not dogging these movies, but take that lens off, and it's like, you know, life can be. You got life can be tough. Yeah.
Nah.
Well, listen, I appreciate you both so much joining me. The movie is Mr. Manhattan. Great to see you both.
Really great seeing you.
See you soon, bud.
Thank you.
You can watch the Pennevega's new movie, Mr. Manhattan, streaming right now on Great American Pureflix. This is Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newsmakers. Our next guest is author Randy Kay. He's here to talk about his new book, Heaven Stormed. He's also going to dive into his fascinating near-death experience. Let's welcome Randy to Newsmakers. Well, Randy, a lot to talk about here. Your book, Heaven Stormed, A Heavenly Encounter, reveals your assignment in the end-time outpouring and tribulation. What an interesting subject matter. Let's just start, for those who don't know, and I know there are a lot of people out there who don't, what is a near-death experience?
Well, I tend to differentiate between near-death and afterlife, Billy, because near-death is, as the name implies, it's near death. That is, the heart has not stopped and the brain is not dead. So brain, obviously, lack of blood supply, dies shortly thereafter the heart stops. The afterlife then would be clinical death. And that's the point at which imagination or any kind of visionary aspect of the experience then goes away, because there's no brain to think about it or configure that, anything that is beyond that experience.
So let's talk about what happened to you, right? Being clinically dead for 30 minutes. Take us through how that happened. And I know this is a loaded question, but I'll let you sort of take it away, what you experienced during that.
Well, I'll give you a pause, Billy, when I meet Jesus, because I had a sore calf waking up in the middle of the night. And I just thought, well, maybe I strained a muscle walking up the stairs. So I came down and I tried to work out the soreness in my calf by bicycling up the coast. We live in San Diego, and what would be a straight road seemed like a straight incline, in that I could not trek up this road without losing my breath, heaving for breath. My calf now is about 1.5 times its size. So I was able to make it back home, and then went to the doctor to get an anti-inflammatory prescription. And lo and behold, when I pressed my heel into the floor, as the doctor had suggested, I collapsed, and I was rushed to the emergency room. So after the CAT scan D-dimer test, which is blood clotting tests in the hospital, there were 7 blood clots that had formed because I'd let it go so long. They had enlarged, traveling up from the lower calf into the main artery blood flow to the lungs. And then I contracted MRSA, which is a drug-resistant bacterial strain. So now I had 7 clots preventing my blood flow to the lungs. The doctor said I was a walking dead man. And then the septic shock, which entered into my body, caused a traffic jam in my vessels, my vascular system. And it was that point that I was like a floppy fish out of water, and I was just flailing on the hospital bed. And then everything went dark initially, and the next moment of recall, I was looking down on my body, my still body, thinking it's strange that I was still at that point, and I was being pulled by this light. I know that sounds cliche almost, but it's absolutely true. There was a pull. But what happened to me, I was in a kind of a very vague, ethereal space initially, where I saw these figures in front of me, and they were warring against each other. There's no other way of putting it. You know, on one side were these figures that looked very gallant looking. The other side, they look more worn looking, more decrepit looking. And it was only after I returned that I was able to assimilate this visualization of what was happening. And I believe there was spiritual warfare going on before at that point, spiritualized. My brain was dead. My heart had stopped, flatline. Hospital records validate that.
So you were clinically dead. You were clinically dead. Were you recognizing, and I know this might seem like a strange question, but in that moment, oh my goodness, I'm detached from my body. Were you aware of that?
Well, that's a great question, because I was aware that I was still myself, but I was aware that I was not of myself on earth, if that makes sense. That I was the same creation, but a different creation in terms of how I articulated and visualized the world about me, or the place about me. So I was in a space where I could see things, not just from a visual perspective, but from a level of understanding, a level of seeing through in a far more grandiose dimensional way. So that as I learned after the fact, that my senses had been extrapolated beyond the 5 senses. So I was seeing things, hearing things beyond which I would be able to do otherwise in my body. So as I was being pulled by the light, I knew to cry out the name of Jesus, and I was cheek to cheek with this figure. And I knew instantly that this was Jesus. I knew it. I knew it. And I wasn't looking at him at this point, but I was so overwhelmed with emotion. And my first thought was, so this is love. And I just caved. And I started shouting every superlative I could think of. Praise you, Lord God. And then he reached down and he wrapped his arms around me, and he pulled me by my arms very gently. And then he turned me around, and I was face to face with love. There's no other description than absolute, consummate love, that I was looking into the eyes of love. I was seeing this glorious figure, and yet he was very similar to what we would describe, I guess, in the Middle Eastern appearance, but more glorious than that. And his eyes were tunneling into every dark place within me. shedding the light of Christ within me. And it was the most incredible experience. And then he leaned over and to my right ear, and he whispered 2 words. He said, "Trust me." And that was the catapulting event for me throughout all of heaven, when I was to perceive all of these things were not just grandiose, but the personhood of Jesus Christ was the imprint of heaven. He was heaven and the expression of it in every respect.
Well, I want to thank you for your time. This has been an incredible conversation. The book is Heaven Stormed, and there's a lot more ground to cover, so I would love to have you back again very soon.
Thank you, Billy. This has been a great honor and privilege.
You can get Randy's book, Heaven Stormed, wherever books are sold. This is Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. For our final segment, we caught up with First Liberty attorney Ryan Gardner. Now, he's here to talk about a complicated case that surrounds an Ohio pastor, Chris Abel, who's been in an ongoing battle with local government over housing the homeless. It's a fight that could land him behind bars. Let's welcome Ryan to Newsmakers. So Ryan, this story over Dad's Place has been a really interesting story arc. You know, we thought we were at a point a couple of months ago, based on my purview, you'll be able to tell us a little more, but where this was settled and the issues with the city were going to be resolved. Where do things currently stand, though?
Well, to go to your point, we were hopeful that that was going to be the case. We were working cordially with the city in good faith, trying to address any of the alleged concerns that they had. But it seems like good faith only ran one way. While the church was doing what it said it would do, the city was feigning cooperation while in fact doing nothing more than building a new case against the church. That's really what has happened. And so on April 24th, the fire chief, the assistant fire chief, and a police officer burst through the church's doors at 5:30 a.m. for a surprise, unannounced fire inspection. And upon completing that inspection, they immediately cited the church for new violations which had never been discussed before. Out of nowhere now, the city is saying that the church is required to have fire sprinklers installed to do its 24-hour ministry. Now, here's the funny thing about that. The church has now been inspected 6 or 7 times, and in each of the previous fire inspection reports, never once did they mention sprinklers. So this is nothing more than an example of the city, again, moving the goalpost. And it's clear that no matter what the church does, no matter what changes it makes, the city is always going to find something new in an effort to stop this ministry from continuing.
And just, you know, let's backtrack a little bit too, because these are the latest things that happened. And obviously it sounds like you all were surprised by this in light of the conversations that you were having with the city, feeling as though things had moved to a positive direction. But so people understand, Dad's Place is a church, and the church has been allowing the homeless, people in need, to stay there, to be inside the building 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whenever they need to be there. That is something, according to the city, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, that is not okay, despite the fact that in the beginning, according to the pastor of the church, in the beginning, the police were actually forwarding people to the church and sort of, you know, telling people, hey, you can go there for help. But at some point there was an issue where they said, no, you're violating zoning laws, correct?
That's exactly right. So the church actually began operating in 2018, and I believe they moved to the building they are currently in sometime in 2019. And even before the church opened its 24-hour ministry last year, they were still regularly allowing people to stay in the church overnight. If there was an extreme weather event, as you might often encounter, especially in those Ohio winters, they opened their doors and they blasted it out on social media. Hey, if you need a place to come stay, to get out of the cold, come to Dad's Place. And funny enough, it's not just the church that was doing this, but the city's own police on their social media would tell people to go to Dad's place if they needed a place to go. And you're absolutely right that for years, the city has brought people to the church knowing full well that those people would be spending night in the church overnight. And even after the church started its 24-hour ministry, police continued to bring people in. In fact, that was really the only contact that the church had with the city. What was a great cooperative relationship with the Bryan Police Department, where they would bring people to Dad's place instead of to jail, essentially.
So these new criminal charges, I know that the previous criminal charges, and that's interesting too, the idea that the goalposts have been a little bit moved here on this, but the original criminal charges essentially were those dropped then back in February? I know that was part of the discussion that was going on. Those were dropped then, right?
Yeah, those were dropped.
Okay. So these new criminal charges, what do they carry with them if he were to be found guilty of this?
Well, for one, they're trying to impose a $1,000 per day fine if the church were to stay open. So that in itself, I mean, in a month, you're talking $30,000. In a year, $365,000. So a huge amount of money on top of potential jail time for Pastor Chris. And that's really what it seems like the city wants to do. They will not stop until the church is shut down, those people are back on the streets, and Pastor Chris is sitting in a jail cell.
I appreciate you taking us through, breaking it all down. This is a story that has been out there. Some people may not be aware of it. So thank you for giving us some of the backstory. Appreciate it.
Happy to do it.
We'll continue to cover that story as it unfolds. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. That's all for Newsmakers. Thank you for watching, and be sure to head on over to the CBN News YouTube channel. That's where you'll find full interviews that you saw on today's episode. Plus, you can check out our new daily podcast Monday to Friday. We feature one full interview every single day with a newsmaker, so you want to be sure to check that out. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. As for this show, we'll see you again